Welcome back. Hope you had a brilliant weekend. Alright, so today is really just a book recommendation day. There was one book that I'm not particularly fond of, but there's a few that I am finding to be extremely good. So I thought I would just talk about them. But first, I've got a new intro. Welcome to my channel. You are entering the world of magic and mysticism with your host, Lee W. Johnson. Join the Red Coven Magic School for more exclusive content. Okay, books. I love books. I absolutely love books. And I'm going to bring up Scribd again, or Scribd, depending on how you prefer to actually say that name, the company's name. I absolutely loved Scribd, or love Scribd, and there's one main reason for it, or two actually. I mean, one, you pay a subscription fee per month, which is a lot less than what you would pay if you were buying paperbacks, well, the amount that I read anyway. You just pay one subscription fee a month and you can add whatever books you want to your library, and what happens is the author gets paid 5% if you read up to, if I remember correctly, 20% of the book. If you read beyond 20% of the book, they get paid the full amount. So even if you put stuff in your library, it just sits there in your library until you actually read it, and then the author gets paid for it. But what I particularly like about Scribd is that they have audiobooks and ebooks, and in a lot of cases they have the, depending on, obviously if the author has actually recorded an audiobook, then what you'll find often is that there's the ebook and the audiobook of the same book. And what I like to do, and this allows me to absolutely gobble up books, is I listen to the the audiobook, and I put it on 1.5 or 1.8 speed so I can get through it really, really quickly. But while I'm listening to it, I'm also reading it at the same time, so I'm following along. I don't read as fast as what I'm listening to, but when I'm actually following along, when I'm reading the book along with the audio, which is going at 1.8 speed, I'm taking it in. So I find that this is extremely beneficial for me anyway, and it allows me to get through books and consume books. I eat books this way. I'm actually going through Castaneda's books again, and doing it this way because on Scribd you'll find the ebook and the audiobook in there. So it's quite strange though, they were all of the ebooks and the audiobooks were in there, but what they do every now and again, it seems, because they did it with my books, is that you can put it into your library, but it will only be available on a certain date. So every now and again they seem to, I think they're trying to create demand or something. You sometimes have to wait for the book to become available. And I've had books in my library which were available, which all of a sudden weren't available, and only available on a particular date. So I think as I said, they try and do this to create demand. So I've got no problem with that. I get to read it eventually anyway. So yeah, I've been going through Castaneda's books, consuming those, but there's a variety of other books that I have read and am reading, which I wanted to mention. The one I'm not particularly fond of is The Art and Practice of Astral Projection by Madame H.P. Blavatsky. Now, Blavatsky started the Theosophical Society back in the early 1900s, and is a very prominent author and a very prominent figure within the Western mystery tradition. Because of the avenues that she went down. What I do find very difficult, and I don't know if we can partly blame it on the times, but back then the view was this whole thing of if you are practicing what we are practicing, it's enlightening and it's enlightenment and such things, whereas the savages are not practicing the same thing, and therefore they're practicing black magic. And that's the whole attitude she has. And, you know, I was listening to the audiobook of this, and she says it. But what I did find quite weird was that, because Blavatsky comes from very much all of the lingo and the terminology that Blavatsky uses is very much from Hinduism. So she, you know, especially in the astral, well, I was listening to the one about the astral projection, but it all relates back to Hinduism and Hindu practices. And she goes into things like Bon Buddhism, being savage, and, you know, there's a lot of tantric practices which are vile and things like that. Obviously don't agree with that, but I carried on because, you know, it was her perspective, it was her view. I want the information that she's trying to give about the astral projection. But she got to this point where, I mean, as I said, bear in mind it's all this terminology from Hinduism, but then there's this point where she starts talking about Kali and how vile and evil Kali is, and Kali's followers are practicing these horrible things. And I was thinking, you know, if you are that immersed in Hindu religion and Hindu tradition, you kind of would have realized what Kali is actually representing. And it's definitely not that typical Christianized, westernized view of what Kali is. So that it put me off. I'll probably finish the book at some stage, but it definitely put me off. There are some very interesting things in there, though, ideologies, practices. She kind of goes through the different levels, layers, spheres, realms of the astral planes, and talks about the inhabitants of these planes and such things. So it is a very interesting book. There's a lot of information we can glean from it. But it's just I hit those spots and I kind of just shut down for a while until I can get myself past it. Some other good books. The Pillars of Tubal, Cain, Nigel Jackson. I read that one again. And, you know, Nigel Jackson writes from a traditional witchcraft point of view. However, this very much, he talks in this book specifically. He talks about the Western mystery tradition, and the integration that happened from the East and from the West. You know, Babylonian, Sumerian, such influences, Egyptian, etc. And this book is very much, or revolves around Luciferian tradition. It revolves around Lucifer. It revolves very much around the Grigori and the Watchers, the fallen angels. You know, at the end of the book, he does get into Michael and Javiel and such archangels, but the discussion is mostly around the Luciferian, and talking about Shemyaza, Samael, and such entities. So it is very much focused on the angelic beings, the divine intelligences, but it gives a lot of parallels between all different traditions from Egypt and Sumeria and Babylonian and Persian and such things. So it is a very, very interesting read, and definitely recommend it. Another book which I've had this book for a long time, The Secret History of Lucifer by Lynn Picknett. It's The Secret History of Lucifer and the Meaning of the True Da Vinci Code. I've read this book for a long time. I can't remember when I bought it. It was years and years ago. I do remember when I initially tried to read it, I thought it was very Christianized and it was just going to bash Lucifer. So I kind of put it down. But I picked it up recently again, and it's a very, very, very interesting read. And If you look into Lynn Picknett's books, she does co-author with various authors. The topics revolve very much around Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but it really is a theosophical examination, a mythological examination of the actual mysteries of biblical mysteries, and it's I would definitely not say she's Christian. She picks things to pieces and she examines them from a very Gnostic perspective. Actually, there is a lot of mention of Gnosticism in here. But it's an incredibly interesting read, and it doesn't just stick with Lucifer itself. She goes into the aspect of like in France, Mary is called Mary Lucifer, and she goes into Diana Lucifera. So she actually examines the whole Luciferian aspect from the perspective of Christ, the biblical aspects, and also parallels them with the Middle Eastern traditions. But she also goes into the feminine. She examines Lilith. She examines Mary Magdalene. So it is an incredibly interesting. I'm still busy with it, so I can't really. I haven't finished it. I'm only about a third of the way through. So we'll finish that. I've got some other books I'm trying to get through at the moment, but yeah, very interesting read if you actually want to pick that up and have a look at it. I definitely recommend it. So the Pillars of Tubal, Cain, and that one are from a Luciferian perspective. Oh, and also I haven't got to that part yet, but she examines Leonardo da Vinci's Luciferian ties. You know, there's the whole idea that the Shroud of Turin, which has said to have the face of Christ imprinted on it, was actually Da Vinci experimenting with photography, very early photography, and it's actually his face on the shroud. So yeah, it goes into all of that. So I'm excited to get to that part. All right, then I picked this one up at the local bookstore last week. Was it last week? Yeah, it was last week. And I don't usually read a book in a day or two, but this one was very good. The Flame in the Cauldron by Orion Foxwood. I recently was listening to Peter Paddon's podcasts, The Crooked Path, when I saved them back in the day when he when they were aired. So I have them stored, and so I re-listened to them. And there was actually an interview with Orion Foxwood, and very interesting character. He is from 3 different backgrounds, really. It's traditional witchcraft, there is Appalachian southern conjure type working, and also fairy tradition. And within the fairy tradition, he is a seer. And what I found interesting was that it was at one of the conventions for paganism. I can't remember which one they were at though. But Peter interviewed him at the convention, and Orion Foxwood was one of the speakers, and he was saying that the funny thing is that the people who arrange the convention obviously want to know what topic you're going to be talking about so they can put it in the program, and he gives them a topic but also informs them, and they know by now that before he steps on stage, the topic's probably going to change. Because he's a seer, he's having constant messages from his fairy companions and such things. So what happens is he gets a message before he steps on stage to actually talk, and that's the topic he talks about, and that's the topic that comes across to the audience that is currently sitting there. So I thought that was quite interesting, but a very interesting person. And this book is extremely interesting. This is the book which discusses traditional witchcraft, and a lot of, not specifically the fairy tradition he follows. I think that was in another book. But this doesn't get into the usual traditional witchcraft that we often find in books. This is very much from his own personal, what he was taught by various teachers. And it goes into things like the witch blood and the witch flame. It goes into the three suns, the central sun, the black sun, or the midnight sun, and then the heart sun, which is within us. There's exercises on how to bring these together and ignite the witch flame. And it's just one of those reads that I couldn't put down. So, and I do find that when I'm actually reading a book, I do get very sleepy. So for me to not be able to put a book down, it's usually a good read, I find anyway. All right, then. What else do we have on the list here? I'm currently listening to the audiobook Dreaming Wide Awake by David J. Brown. The very, very interesting book. If you're interested in lucid dreaming, I would definitely recommend getting this. I do believe, as I said, I'm still listening to it. I do believe he will go into the more spiritual side of lucid dreaming, because he does speak about Bond shamanism and the practices of lucid dreaming from Hinduism and things like that. But he's a psychonaut. He takes psychedelics, or he has done for years and years, to aid in his lucid dreaming. So you've got that aspect of the psychedelic, which he discusses. He also discusses the actual science within the brain, the science of actual sleeping, and then starts examining triggers in order to get into lucid dreaming, how to stay awake while keep your mind awake while your body is asleep. There's all these different practices that he discusses. So it really does. I've read several lucid dreaming books, and this one really examines it from a lot of different angles and a lot of different perspectives. So I'm finding this to be a very, very good book. Then, okay, I've discussed that one. On the Toltec Path, Kenny Eaglefeather. Now, as I said in the beginning, I am reading all of Castaneda's books again. I have these periods where I just get totally immersed in Castaneda. Now, this on the Toltec Path by Kenny Eaglefeather. I've read like Victor Sanchez, who also discusses Toltec practices. But what I find good about this particular book by Kenny Eaglefeather is that he takes all of the terminology. What you might find if you do get into Castaneda and you've been practicing a variety of different other paths, witchcraft, Western mystery tradition, Thelema, Golden Dawn, whatever it may be, Wicca, etc., 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 there's a kind of a similar terminology that you find within those things. When you get to Castaneda and Don Juan's teachings, that terminology differs a great deal. You've got stalking and dreaming. You've got the different attentions. You've got, and when he talks about the dreaming body, you can equate these things to things like astral bodies, and dreaming. And when we're talking about stalking, it's about stalking energy. You stalk energy in order to gather it and use it within your practice, and specifically in dreaming. But as I said, there's all this terminology which gets a bit difficult to understand sometimes, and in Ken Eaglefeather's book, he takes all of that terminology and he discusses it. So he breaks it down extremely well, and he also changes some of the terminology to suit his own preference, really. I've forgotten what he called, because he keeps dreaming as dreaming, but he changes stalking to I can't remember now, completely forgotten. I keep thinking hunting, but it's not hunting. But anyway, he changes the terminology, changes warrior into ranger. I'm not sure why. But he right in the beginning discusses why he's using these terms and why it better fits his own personal understandings. But then he starts going through, he discusses stalking itself, and he discusses intent and impeccability and everything. He breaks it down so well. So it allows you to get a better understanding of all of the terminology that Castaneda uses. And I'm still busy with that one. I almost finished with it. I believe at the last chapter he discusses actual practices and steps you can take to help you with all of these things. So I'm looking forward to the end of that one as well. You'll probably notice that, as I said, I do read a lot, but I also read multiple books at the same time. Let's see, I'm currently reading On the Toltec Path, I'm listening to Dreaming Wide Awake, I am listening to Castaneda and reading Castaneda, and also have to finish this one. So yeah, I'm a bit of a book nerd, what can I say? Okay, I think that gives you plenty of reading material anyway that I would recommend. And bear in mind that I am, as I said, on the Castaneda wagon at the moment, so a lot of the stuff that I'm reading is revolving a lot around Toltec, but mostly dreaming, the dreaming aspect of it. So I'm going a lot into that, so that's why the book recommendations have a lot of dreaming and Toltec stuff in it. Okay, so that's my book recommendations for this particular moment. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you on Wednesday for Ask Lee. Have a good one. Cheers for now. Bye bye.